Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to welcome a special guest from Mexico City. We'll be speaking with my friend Siskia Lagomarsino. How are you doing, Siskia?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you.
And tell me, how old were you when you started learning languages?
Well, there's literally like two answers to that one question. The first one would be like when I was a kid, my parents were constantly speaking in Spanish and English, so in a way, both languages are just one language to me. You could say I started learning languages from the cradle, but then again, I didn't actually start learning English because I wanted to. It just was part of my education as part of the family, right? So if you ask me when I actually started learning languages because I wanted to, that must have been when I was about 18 or 19, when I was going to college, and I had the opportunity to start learning Japanese.
Okay, and so you learned natively as a child both English and Spanish?
Yeah, that's the case.
And then how old were you then when you started speaking English? It was at more or less at the same time?
It was more or less at the same time. You could say that I've always expressed myself better in written English and spoken Spanish. It's different for me in that sense because the thing is, I always had this thing in which I preferred to speak to my parents in English. And so things that were more personal, things that were more about my concerns, my thoughts, came out better in English. While the practical side of my life was better spoken in Spanish. So yeah, it's like two parts of my personality. If you ask me.
Yeah, I think I've had a similar experience where I prefer speaking, learning things in English or doing academic things in English, but speaking about my personal life maybe in Spanish.
Yeah,
I
I
would
know the
prefer.
case.
And what got you interested in learning Japanese?
Well, since being a kid, I was attracted to anime. I am not sadly anymore. I sort of lost contact with that whole culture. But maybe since I was like probably in fifth grade, sixth grade, I started liking that. And the very few occasions that I got the chance to hear these works in Japanese, I thought the language sounded really cool. But I didn't have the resources to learn that language. So, like I told you, I had to actually start doing it when I was in college, and I had the opportunity to enroll myself in a course in college.
So you didn't start until you were in college, actually formally studying the language?
No, it took the interest stuck. I was always really interested in the language because it has a very melodic sound. I think that anybody who has learned even a little bit of Japanese or listened to it can
It has
agree
a
with
very
me that
beautiful rhythm
it sounds
to it.
pretty. Yeah.
And what has been the greatest challenge to learn Japanese? Is it the writing system, the grammar, or the pronunciation?
I said there are two different challenges. The writing system is a pain that I'm not going to debate with. It's difficult to learn to a degree because let's say that you're a beginner. All of you beginners that are doing hiragana and katakana are saying, why do I have to learn this? I just want to speak Japanese. And if you think about it from our standing point, it's learning 90 symbols to be able to express yourself in that. And then comes kanji, which is eternal. It goes on and on and on. That, I would say, is a challenge of tenacity. You have to stick at it because the better you get at expressing yourself in written Japanese, the more you can, I don't know how to express this, go into the heart of the culture. The Japanese culture is very, very
through the writing.
It's very much about writing. And the thing that I would say was a real challenge for me was the word order in Japanese. There is a point where you feel absolutely frustrated that you cannot express yourself in Japanese until the moment comes where you feel like you're in a dark room and suddenly you find the light switch. And when you are able to flick that switch, you are able to change the order of your thoughts. Getting to that point was a true challenge for me. After that, it was easy peasy.
So you have to change the way you perceive things, or the way you perceive how you should express yourself.
Yeah. It's things like the verb coming at the end in Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
When you're at the very start of learning that language, it's something you can hardly process. In Spanish, you say yo como manzanas, and you are very used to the fact that you are putting the object of the action after that.
Mm-hmm.
In Japanese, it's the other way around. So this is a very simple example, but when you are trying to express yourself about, I don't know, why you failed to take the train to get to class that morning, it's a lot more complex, right?
Mm-hmm. You have to go through a more difficult thought process in order to express the same idea.
Exactly.
And as far as pronunciation, was it simple for you, being a native Spanish speaker, to reproduce Japanese sounds?
Yeah, to a certain degree, I think that Spanish speakers have the single biggest advantage in learning Japanese, because particularly Mexican Spanish has a very similar pronunciation to Japanese. I am not sure if I can say the same about people from Costa Rica or Cuba, but they probably have the advantage in the ear of being able to make out the sounds that don't sound so familiar for English or German or French speakers.
The vowels are the same, aren't they? The same 5 vowels?
Yeah, exactly the same 5 vowels. And pretty much all consonants sound the same. And the fact that you, in Japanese, sounds are made up by putting together a consonant and a vowel. It's all sounds you've already heard before. There's when I was teaching Japanese, the thing I noticed that people really didn't get was 2 sounds that sound so similar to us that just they don't make sense to separate them, which is she and chi. We are sort of used to mixing them up, but they're different sounds in Japanese. That's about the extent of how difficult it is to master the pronunciation of Japanese for a Spanish speaker. But I do agree that it's difficult for other people.
Wow, no, it's really interesting to hear about. And tell me, how has traveling enriched your language learning experience? Because I know you traveled abroad a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the thing about traveling, I think, is that it forces you out of your comfort zone, and it forces you to challenge yourself. Even if your level is not so high in that language, you do know that it's necessary that to express yourself, you do an effort. The first time I was in Japan, I literally spent about a week in a fetal position. I just didn't know how to manage speaking to people in Japanese, and this was in spite of having learned Japanese for already 6 years, so I was actually quite proficient at it. And I noticed that it's that little element of challenge that has really enriched my language learning. Not particularly because of the whole thing, the whole process about immersing yourself in the language. That certainly does help. But if you're not doing your part to challenge yourself and try to speak that language, it pretty much amounts to the same thing.
So traveling made you give that extra effort to the language, right?
It's a thing, for me personally, it's a thing about extending the people of the country I'm visiting a courtesy. I could just going stomping and saying I'm going to speak Spanish or English and I do not understand your language, but I hate that mindset. So for me, it's partly trying to be courteous, extending the same courtesy they're doing me by trying to accommodate me usually, and then challenging myself. That came afterwards. I realized that it was an element of my language learning process afterwards.
That you were missing, maybe beforehand.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. And what's your favorite method to learn a language, such as Japanese or a different language?
I think it varies per language because, for example, like I told you, Japanese, I had the most trouble with learning the word order, and then being able to apply every word and every grammar pattern that I learned in spoken language, right? So there's that particular issue. In Japanese, the system that worked the best for me was to listen to lots and lots of TV. Multimedia, I think you could say it.
Mm-hmm.
Watch movies, watch anything that has real humans speaking at a natural speed. Obviously, at first I didn't understand anything, but then I realized that I was starting to catch one or two words, one or two sentences, 2 or 3 sentences until I could eventually make out the gist of the conversation.
So little by little, you were building up the language and piecing it together.
Yeah. But for example, that system did not work so well for me while I was learning, for example, French. When I was learning French, I had much more trouble learning vocabulary than learning how to express myself. Like, isolated vocabulary was my biggest issue. So what I did there was to focus on spaced repetition and reading lots. And since I had already mechanized the pronunciation, excuse me, I just translated naturally into more fluid conversations.
So you preferred studying vocabulary and building up the amount of input that you had in your mind before you could express yourself in French.
Yeah, I guess that it changes per language because every different language poses a different challenge. Excuse me for using this word over and over. But it does help to recognize that not every new language that you learn will give you the same headaches that the prior one did.
And I think a lot of people try to approach studying different languages with the same method, and maybe that's why they don't have the same amount of success that they have with French that they already had with English, because they're trying to approach it the same way. Like you said, they have to find a different method for a different language.
Yeah, for me it's a little bit like you have to learn the road map of a language. One particular language may seem like a long, leisurely plain to walk through, but one language may seem like a rocky mountain to scale. And you have to design strategies to handle all those challenges.
Wow, no, that's a really great advice, because I think a lot of people don't realize that they need to take different approaches for different languages.
So, yeah, I agree. It's like, it's a little bit like solving any problem, like a math problem. You say, well, I was taught to deal with this in one determined way, and I'm not going to detour to try to change. No, languages do not work that way.
Well, you have to be very versatile and very willing to adapt.
Yeah, I think so.
Wow, fantastic. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to speak with me, Siskia, and I'll talk to you soon.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.